Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. So let's continue with the second part of numerical computation and expression. In the first part, we have covered about string and string concatenation, also about the print methods, which include printline, print and printf, where we look at the syntax, format specifiers, and also the flags. We will look at escape sequences and then about variables. What is an escape sequence? So an escape sequence is a series of characters that represents a special character. Let's look at this example. So we have system.out.println, I said, double quote, hello, double quote to you. This line would confuse the compiler because it would interpret the second quote as the end of the string. So you won't be able to compile the program. So an escape sequence begins with a backslash character. To print the double quote, we can use slash double quote. For example, as shown here, we have system.out.println, I said, slash double quote hello slash double quote to you. If we run the code, it will display I said in double quote hello to you. This slide shows some of the Java escape sequences that we might want to use. We have seen some of this in Lab 1 task. /b is for backspace. For example, if we have system.out.println roses are red /b will give roses are re. So /b it goes one space back. /t is for tab. For example, if we have system.out.println roses are red /t violets are blue. So the output that we will get is roses are red and then a tab, then it continues with violets are blue. /n is for new line. It is useful when you want to get to the new line within your sentence or at the end of it. For example, over here we have system.out.println roses are red /n violets are blue. So it will display roses are red in one line and in the next line violets are blue. This is the same if we use two print lines. For example, system.out.println roses are red and in another system.out.println violets are blue. So you can choose to use either escape sequence /n or use several print line. /r is for carriage return. For example, we have system.out.println roses are red /r violets are blue. The output that we will get is violets are blue. The sentence roses are red is removed because /r returns to the beginning and remove the previous words. That's why we only have violets are blue as the output. Next, we have double quote. So for double quote, we have to write /double quote so that the double quote will be printed onto the screen. For example, system.out.println roses are /double quote red /double quote violets are blue. So we will get roses are red and red is in double quote, violets are blue. For single quote, we can choose not to use /single quote because in our system.out.println it is surrounded by double quotes. So our compiler does not get confused if we have a single quote within our double quotes. For example, system.out.println roses are single quote red single quote violets are blue. It can be compiled and executed. We can also write it as system.out.println roses are /single quote red /single quote violets are blue. So for single quote, we have these two options that we can use. And lastly, we have double backslash for backslash. If we use single backslash, we will not be able to compile our code. it will show us that we have illegal escape character error. So for example, over here we have system.out.println roses are /red, violets are blue. The output from this code is roses are /red, violets are blue. Let's look at this example. So this example shows a class called roses and how you can use \n for new line and also \t for tab in long sentence using only one print line. When you run this code, you should get this output as shown on this slide. To double check the output and the code, let's look at the system.out.println that we have. We have roses are red, and then we have /n/t, which means after displaying roses are red, it should go to the next line, and then have a tab before continuing and display violets are blue. Then we have /n, so the next sentence will be in the next line, which is sugar is sweet /n/t, so next line and a tab, and the line but I have commitment issues. See here that commitment issues is within the double quotes that should be printed on the screen, so we have to use /double quote. Continuing from there, we have another /n/t and the sentence, so I rather just be friends at another /n/t and the last sentence at this point in our relationship. Another thing from the system.out.println is the use of string concatenation, which is the use of the plus sign. We use the plus sign because we separate our sentences into several smaller sentences. If we write it within one line, meaning that it's going to be a long line, we do not need to use the plus sign. Now let's try and do this together. It says write a single println statement that produces the following output. In double quote, thank you all for coming to my home, and then in the next line, tonight, and another double quote, he said mysteriously. So how should we write it in Java? We know that we have double quotes, so we will use /double quote, and there's also the next line, so that is using /n. So we have system.out.println, and then we have /double quote, thank you all for coming to my home /n tonight. And then we have /double quote, he said mysteriously. To recap again, the plus sign that we have here refers to string concatenation. If we write it in one long line, we do not need to write the plus sign. But as you can see here, it can be easier to separate the long sentence into several smaller sentences. Now let's look at variables. What is a variable? We have looked at it without knowing what it is in a few codes previously. A variable is a name for a location in memory that holds a value. A variable declaration specifies the variable's name and the type of information that it will hold. For example, int total. Int refers to the data type, which we are going to learn later on. In Java, there are 8 primitive data types. We have seen float, that refers to float number with decimal points, characters, char, and also boolean, which has the value of true or false. To declare several variables, we can write it in several lines or within one line. For example, int count temp results, or we can write it as int count, int temp, int result. The important part to be aware of is if you write it in one line, you need to use the comma, and you do not need to repeatedly write the data type. But if you write it within several lines, meaning that you declare all of the variables separately, you need to write the data type, then the variable name, and end it with semicolon. It is an error to store a value whose type does not match the type of the variable. For example, string greeting equal to 20. This gives an error because the type don't match. How should we change this to overcome the error? There are two ways that can be done. The first one is if we want the variable greeting to be of type string, we can have our value 20 to be within the double quotes. So that means string greeting equal to double quote 20. The second way is by changing the data type to int. So we have int greeting equal to 20. It depends on what you want the code to do, whether you want to have it as int or string. Uninitialized variable. Say that we have int lucky number, meaning that we have declared a variable called lucky number with the data type int. When we compile this code, it will not be able to compile and we will have an error that says our lucky number variable has not been initialized. That happens when we try to print out the value of our lucky number. This makes sense because what we have done so far was just declaring a variable and then print out a variable without giving it any valid value. Let's look at this full code that has variable lucky number as an example. Any local variable needs to be initialized before it is used. Local here means it can only be used within the specific method, which in this example, it can only be used within the main method. Class variable is the variable that is usually written after the class declaration. It can be used in any methods in the class, and class variables have a default value. It, for example, has the default value of 0. This means for class variables, we do not need to initialize them. If we have two variables with the same name as in this code, the latest one will be used. In this case, if we run the code, it will give an error saying lucky number has not been initialized because it refers to the local variable. If we comment out our local variable int lucky number, when we run this code, it will display the value 0 because class variable of type int has the default value of 0. We will learn more about class variables later in the course. Going back to initializing our variable, let's look at this code. Here we have int lucky number and then on the next line, lucky number equal to 0. So over here, we declare the variable and then initialize it in the next line. We can also declare and initialize it straight away within one line. So we can write int lucky number equal to 0. Normally, since we do not know the value yet, it is better to initialize it to 0 so that if we accidentally do some addition or any kind of arithmetic operation, it will still give the value of 0. For any variable with the same name, we can only declare it once. We will get an error if we try to declare it several times. For example, we have int lucky number and then on the next line, int lucky number equal to 0. Is this valid? If we try and run the code, we will not be able to compile it. We will get an error that says variable lucky number is already defined. We can initialize our variable anywhere and reassign it to another value later on, depending on what we want our code to do. The only thing is that for any variable, we can only declare it once. As shown in this code, in the beginning, we declared and straight away initialized the variable lucky number to 0. Then we display it on the screen using print line. In the next line, we reassign it to the value 100 and display it on the screen. By doing it this way, we are reusing our variables as we do not actually need to have two variables, but we can have several variables if that is needed in our program. When we reassign the value of the variable here, we cannot get the value 0 from previous initialization, as the value has been replaced by the value 100. Now let's look at what is an identifier. Identifier refers to the name of a class, name of a variable, name of a constant, and also the name of a method. Previously, we have looked at an example of a variable where it was identified with the name lucky number. So, lucky number is an identifier for our variable. There are several rules for identifiers in Java. Identifiers can be made up of letters, digits, and underscore, but it cannot start with a digit. It can also use other symbols such as question mark or percentage. We cannot have spaces inside our identifiers, and there are some reserved words that cannot be used. Identifiers are case sensitive. We have seen this in our lab 1, where capital T is not the same as smaller letter t. This slide shows some examples of legal and illegal variable names. Can volume 1 is a valid variable name where it consists of letters and numbers. X is also valid, but it can make programs harder to understand. For example, if we are calculating the parameter, it makes more sense to have our variables as int parameter, int width, and int length rather than having int x, int y, and int z. We can use it, but it is less descriptive of what those variables would mean. We cannot have our variable to start with number. For example, 6-pack is not allowed. And then we cannot have spaces. For example, can space volume. Double is a reserved word, so we cannot use it as a variable name. However, if we have double D in capital letter, we can use it because it is no longer a reserved word. This slide shows some of the reserved words in Java. We haven't seen all of these, but throughout this course, we will be using many of these. Since we have only written simple code, let's look at this class header and method header. Which words in this code cannot be used as identifiers? In the class header, we have public class example 1. Public and class are reserved words. Example 1 is the class identifier, which is valid. We can use it. Public static void main string args. The word public, static, void, and also string are other examples of reserved words. Main is the identifier of the method, and args is a variable. By convention, variable names start with a lowercase letter. Class names start with an uppercase letter, and constant names are in uppercase letters. What it meant by that is, if we see this example of our code, we have our class name, which is called example1, and we have it as uppercase letter for the first letter. And then for our variable, we have int number, and number is in lowercase letter. For our constant, which is pi, pi, it is in uppercase letters. What if I write it differently? For example, the code shown in the pink box. Is it valid? Do you think that I can run this code? It is valid, but only that by convention, meaning that it is widely used and known that we will start our class name with capital letter, constant names all in capital letters, and variable name starts with a lowercase. It can get confusing in the middle of the code if say that you have the variable number in capital letters, where other programmers will assume that it is a constant even though it is actually just a variable. A constant is an identifier that is similar to a variable, except that it holds the same value during its entire existence. As the name implies, it is constant, not variable. The compiler will issue an error if you try to change the value of a constant. In Java, we use the final modifier to declare a constant. For example, final int min height equal to 69. You cannot change the value of a constant at any point in your code. That's why we wrote final in front of it, meaning that that's the final value. Any final constants can be used as part of any variable's calculation, only that the value of that constant will never change. A simple example is, say that we have final double pi, pi in capital letter, equal 3.14. We know that the value pi will always be 3.14, so it makes sense to have it as a constant instead of a variable. Constants are useful for three important reasons. First, they give meaning to otherwise unclear literal values. Secondly, they facilitate program maintenance. Say that if a constant is used in multiple places, the value only needs to be set in one place. Thirdly, they formally establish that a value should not be changed throughout the program. To summarize, we have looked at escape sequences, which is the use of backslash, variables and how to initialize them, valid names or identifiers for our variables, classes, constants, and also methods. And finally, we have learned about constants where it has the word final. That's all for the second part. We have one more part to cover.